my name is Missy Peterson, and I'm 49 years old. I was diagnosed with cystic fibrosis at a year and a half, and I had my double lung transplant in 1996 when I was 23 years old. And I've been going to the transplant games since 1998, and not enough people know about the transplant games. And when you ask other transplant recipients, hey, did you know about the transplant games? A lot of them have not heard of the games, even though we try to get the word out there via social media or at our transplant centers or whatnot. We want it to be a thing that every transplant recipient and donor family gets to experience and go to.
I'm Marissa Giuliano. I am 31 and I have CF. I have been going to the transplant games since 2018.
So I'm Isa, and I have been going to the games this will be my 9th games. I'm 18 years post-transplant.
My name is Matt. I am a double lung transplant ×2. My first transplant was in May of 2012. And those new lungs did really well for me, lasted a little more than 8 years. And then I had my second double lung transplant. My first Transplant Games of America was in 2016 in Cleveland.
Hi, my name is Erin Hoy. I am 31 years old. I was born with cystic fibrosis and I was diagnosed at birth. I competed in my first World Transplant Games in Spain.
The neat things about the transplant games is the fact that the donor families and the donors, living donors, get to go as well. And usually each team brings with them a donor family to witness what their loved one's donation has been able to do. And the living donors get to go and they can compete with their recipients if they'd like, the kidney and liver transplant or liver donors. It's just a way to bring more awareness to the need for organ transplants. And the donor families are so very important because obviously without the donor families and the donors, we would not be here today. They have a special quilt pinning ceremony in memory or honor of your donor. And there's a donor tribute, honor our donors at the transplant games. It's amazing.
The transplant games is really for everyone. Even though transplant games, of course, we want to celebrate transplants, we want to celebrate health and strength and vitality. Let's face it, we're transplant recipients. So we all have a very complex medical history. And especially for lungs, sometimes transplants don't go well. Sometimes we don't have 100% lung capacity. So for people with all levels of lung capacity, there are different tiers of sports. The first tier is very low intensity, playing darts, Texas Fold'em, cornhole, trivia, those sorts of and lyrics for life, like a singing competition. And then the middle tier, the second tier, is moderate intensity. It can be pickleball, it can be basketball, volleyball, table tennis, and so on. And then the third intensity is swimming, track and field, or cycling, for example, the most cardiovascularly intense sports. The beauty of the games is that when I first started going, there used to be a group run by Joanne Shum, and it was called the Lung Gathering. And so specifically lung recipients would be called to get together during the games. And you saw people with oxygen, you saw people in wheelchairs, you saw people of all levels of functioning. We're still celebrating life because they're still here, even if they're not getting into the pool. Sometimes the athletes that have the most medical challenges are the ones that get the greatest applause and cheers. The ones who come in last because they're doing their very best to keep going. And we celebrate all victories, not just gold medals. We celebrate, a 75-year-old who's running the 100-meter dash and makes it to the end of the line. And it's the greatest accomplishment of their post-transplant life. I'm 50 years old now, so I'll be competing with 50, 59 age group. It is a miracle for me to be at this stage of my life. I am a lot slower than I've been in the past because of other medical issues, but I don't care. I'm just going to reach my potential at 18 years post-transplant with various health challenges that I've had. We create this incredible team bond, and that's the blessing of the games, to just have these friendships.
My first transplant games were in 2016 in Spain. They took place only a year and a half after my transplant. So I was extremely nervous. The first year is the most crucial in recovery. And I kind of spent that time swimming and pushing myself. But I was so excited. I remember when I first got to Spain, there was a team meeting in the hotel where I got to meet everybody from all over the United States who had transplants. I don't think I had met anyone before that had even had a transplant. I had maybe seen them in passing at the clinic, but it was so exciting where you're sitting around, everybody's kind of hanging out, and people are saying, hey, I gotta go, I gotta take my pills, I gotta take my meds, I'm on a schedule. It's just kind of funny to relate to people in that way. That was like a very strong memory for me. I met two really good people that I ended up going out to dinner with the first night, who I've stayed close friends with. I was super nervous. I hadn't competed since high school. I didn't even compete my senior year because I was so sick. The last time I competed was my junior year of high school. I didn't even know it was my last race at that point. But it's kind of like riding a bike. Like the second the shotgun went off, I dove in and I knew what I was there to do. I ended up medaling in every single race that I competed in that year. And it was, I think, after the second day getting out of the pool, and it was my last race. And that's when I knew that I had earned a medal in everything I competed in. And I just remember getting out, and it felt like nobody was around me. And I just stood there with the cap and goggles in my hand. And it was just a beautiful moment that I'll never forget. And I can't even express like how my entire body felt in that moment, just knowing that I had come that far. I had set a goal, I had achieved it. And not only had I achieved it, but I had done more than I thought I was going to do.
So I met someone at the Transplant Games in 2018, and he also had CF. And he signed up for the two hardest swimming events, and he was not a swimmer. And so he was, I don't know, he just kind of signed up for him, and he, dove in, and he's swimming as best as he can, and he's getting tired, and so he's like stopping on the wall. And like I said, he chose the two hardest events because they were on a certain day that he could go that day. Everyone there was cheering him on and encouraging him to finish. And he did. He finished it was a long race, and he finished the whole thing. And just I had everyone on their feet in the stands, and it was a cool moment for sure.
And it's also been amazing to meet people with cystic fibrosis who are transplanted from Germany or from Netherlands, and just be in awe of like, wow, you're like me.
Mhm.
And I also want to
Yeah.
add, you being on the track in Malaga, Spain, and
Mhm.
you were running, and I was like, wow, he's a torpedo. And to be able to say, wow, he has CF, and to see you run so fast, like that this illness is really tough and challenging, and it's a real bugger, but underneath those lungs, once they're fixed, you have such incredible athletic talent. And I was just in awe. And I could say the same thing about Scott Pinner and all the other non-lung recipients. To watch them become such extraordinary athletes, it makes me proud. It brings tears to my eyes of how we are allowed for the first time with healthy lungs to reach our fullest athletic potential.
A couple of the memorable experiences that I that I know I have had. I remember at the games in 2016, there was kind of a moment where I just kind of stopped and I was like, wow, this is incredible. And that was during track and field. There was actually a combination of two moments. There was one when there was a young boy, a man, he couldn't have been not even 10 years old, maybe like 8 or 9 years old. And this young man was out there running. I think it was only maybe a 25 or 50 meter sprint they had for the little kids. But I was just like, wow, that kid's already had a transplant. I don't even know what kind of transplant he had, but he was out there pushing himself and running, like I said, the 25 or 50 meter sprint. And then a short while later, there was an individual who I think they announced he was the oldest competitor at the games. And if I remember correctly, he was like 89 years old. I believe he was a liver recipient, if I remember correctly. And he was also out there running the 100 meters. You know, here's this 89-year-old man running the 100 meters. And I was just like, wow, like, that's just so awesome. That first of all, there's such a range. I mean, you've got little kids, you've got people as old as like 89 out there competing and running and just pushing the envelope and pushing their own bodies. You know, it's really interesting when you go through a lung transplant in particular. You never realize how important oxygen is to the body. I don't think anybody does unless you've been through a double lung transplant like Isa and I, and have previously lived with a disease like CF that completely deteriorates and just ravages your lungs. Prior to my first transplant, I was on oxygen for quite a while. And it got to the point where my lung function was down to 20%, and I was on O2 supplementation 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. You know, at that point, when it came time for my first transplant, my daughter was about 3 years old. And I was so weak that I could not even pick up and hold my own daughter. And that was probably the hardest emotional aspect of where I was at physically in my condition. You know, that just absolutely killed me. And I remember, just like it was yesterday, you know, being in the hospital. It was April of 2012. I was in the hospital for an exacerbation of my disease. And I was talking to my doctors about going back to work and asking them, when can I go back to work, you know? And they looked at me and they said, Matt, you're probably not going to be around in 2 years unless you get a double lung transplant. And I was like, wow, that just kind of hit me like a ton of bricks. I didn't realize at that point that my disease had gotten that bad. And for them to tell me I only had 2 years left to live unless I got this transplant was a big wake up call for me. And, you know, so I was added to the transplant list not long after that. And lo and behold, 2.5 weeks later, I actually got the call.
Survivor's guilt and how the transplant games helps with that. Survivor's guilt is real. I had my transplant when I was 23. I'm very tiny. I knew it would probably have to be somebody very young. And I think about that a lot. I mean, pretty much on a daily basis. It's kind of like, why am I here and my donor isn't? What made my life so much more important than theirs? But you can't think about it that way. And knowing that I'm doing the best that I can with the gift that I was given, and being able to go to these games and honor my donor in front of other donor families who also get to go to these games, that helps to let them know that, look, we're doing things that we think your loved one would want us to do. And it's so important to have these games as well in cities where the organ donors are, the numbers of them are down and low because there's not enough awareness out there. So they try to have the games now in cities where those numbers are low and bring more awareness to the need for organ donation. And that's very important because people need to check that box on their driver's license application, and they need to sign up to be organ donors, and they need to tell their families they want to be an organ donor, because oftentimes if family doesn't know and one person says no, they can't be an organ donor.
My donor saved my life and there is no way that I can repay them. It's tough sometimes knowing that, and just knowing that in order for my life to continue, someone else's had to end. While my family and friends celebrates me getting new lungs, someone else's family and friends is suffering and grieving. I also lost my younger sister, Janice, to CF 10 months before my transplant. We were less than 2 years apart and best friends our whole lives. And so I often wonder why I was the lucky one and got to live while she did not. My sister and donor give me strength, and I try every day to live in honor of them. I want to make them proud. Without them, I would not be where I am today. And the Transplant Games is an opportunity for donors and recipients to demonstrate how amazing and life-changing organ transplantation can be. It's not just us, the recipient, out there competing. It's the recipient and the donor organ inside of each of us that has allowed us to stay alive. It's not my lungs allowing me to take full deep breaths and push myself to the wall. It's my donor's lungs. Because of my donor, I'm able to do that. And I can't thank them enough. They're a part of me, and I will always cherish the life-saving gift they've given me.
So a question I do get asked a lot about is survivor's guilt in regards to my donor family. I know that there's a lot of people that compete in the games that they will often write things on their body like, this is for blank so-and-so regarding their donor. I fortunately or unfortunately, depending how you look at it, actually do not know anything about my donor. I did write my donor family a letter after the 1-year mark of my transplant, which is when I am allowed to reach out to them. And I just let them know how grateful I was. I let them know that I was training to compete in Spain at that point. I go back and forth on wanting to know who my donor family is. I witnessed a swimmer who had her donor's name on her back, and she did not compete well. And she kind of had an emotional breakdown that day, feeling as if she had let her donor family down. She told me that they would follow up with her and ask her how she did in the games, and she didn't have anything to report back. And so I just feel like that I already put a lot of pressure on myself. I just don't know if for myself that would be the healthiest thing. I would, of course, love to hear from them. But I get peace at night knowing that I am doing the most and the best that I can, taking care of my body and taking care of my lungs. And I'd like to think that my actual donor is somewhere, and they can see that and they can appreciate it. So I get a lot of peace from that. And if they do want to reach out, I think that they would be super proud of where I am and how well I've done in the games.
I can talk a little bit about survivor's guilt. I don't know about Isa, but for me, this is definitely something that I have lived with, that I've dealt with. It's something that is very real. And it's a sensitive topic. It's not something that I'm afraid to talk about. After my first transplant in 2012, I think a lot of times we ask ourselves, why me? Like I'm a big believer, and I have a strong faith in the Lord. And the way that I got through this a lot was just through prayer and trying to ask that question to God, like, why would he choose me to be this recipient of this gift of life when I have seen so many of my friends and fellow CF patients who were not able to receive a transplant. They didn't make it. Some of them were on the list and didn't make it to that point where they received transplant. Some of them didn't live long enough to even be put on the list. And when you see people like that who are your friends and people who have the same disease that you do and go through the same exact things every single day that you do, and then you survive and they don't, that does something to you mentally and emotionally. On my faith in the Lord to help get me through that. Prayed a lot about why I think this has happened to me, why in terms of receiving this gift of life, and more so, what does he want me to do with this gift? It's obviously a gift, and I feel like people receive gifts for a reason. Since my first transplant in 2012, I have started doing public speaking, motivational, inspirational talks, and I've given talks to schools, to school graduations, school assemblies, churches, company business meetings, fundraisers, you name it, and I've probably given some kind of a public talk in that type of venue. The motto that I've sort of come up with is never give up, always persevere. And I share my story in hopes of inspiring other people out there that no matter what adversity it is that they're facing, whether it's cystic fibrosis or whether they're stressed out about passing their next math test, we all face adversity in different ways. We all battle different physical challenges in different ways. And I never, ever, ever come across as like my challenges are more significant than anybody else. Always trying to maintain a positive attitude has been so helpful for me in getting through the adversity that I have faced, not just physical, but otherwise, and especially with survivor's guilt that I have dealt with. And I still, to this day, I'd be lying if I said that I don't deal with survivor's guilt to this day, especially now that I've been through 2 transplants and we're now in this post-COVID era.
There's a girl that had a heart transplant. She lived in Pennsylvania. And I mean, we talk almost every day, like we're super close, but we don't talk about, here and there, we'll talk about transplant stuff, but we don't even talk about transplant stuff all the time. We talk about, like, did you watch the latest episode of the Bravo Housewives? Like, we're like true friends that we have connected. And
going to the transplant games helps me physically, especially physically. In 2008, I went into chronic rejection and the doctors actually didn't think I was going to make it. And one of the things that I did to improve my health and get myself back to a somewhat of a normal life again was I would go down to the neighborhood pool and I would swim from one end of the pool to the other end of the pool and stop and use my oxygen. And I just kept doing that on like a weekly basis until I got strong enough to where I was able to swim laps again and able to compete at the games again. And in 2010, I went to the games and competed and won medals again that year. So that was pretty amazing. So it forces you to obviously work out and get back in the pool or get back on the golf course or get back on the bike or whatever it might be. And that helps your health, obviously, in turn, helps your health, helps me improve my lung function, my stamina, gain some muscle strength and that kind of thing. And it's great. If I didn't have the transplant games to focus on, I don't know that I would be here sitting here talking to you today.
I just wanted to say my first games, I met someone with cystic fibrosis who was 25 years post-transplant. And that just made my jaw drop to know that this is the potential to live this long. I hope now people might see me 18 years post swimming in the swimming pool, no matter what I've had or what issues have come up, that I'm still here. And so I think that's the beauty of the games, is to just give ourselves perspective, and to create a community. We know how important the cystic fibrosis community is, but after our transplants, there's another community that's awaiting you, one to celebrate the gift of organ donation alongside you. So please do consider coming to the transplant games. You can even come as a spectator and just watch and see what it's all about. So thank you for listening.
Know that these gifts are not going unused. We are doing the best that we can with what we are given. And the transplant game shows these people moving forward with their lives and wanting to compete with one another and wanting to share that joy with the donor families who, without the donor families, we wouldn't be here today. So thank you very, very much for your gifts.
That's what it's about. That's what it's about. Just being out there and trying your best.